And just like that, Trump has delivered on one of his campaign promises, this time by signing an executive order banning transgender athletes from competing in women's sports at schools that receive federal funding. Officially titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports, subtle as a brick this one, the order empowers federal agencies to punish schools that don't comply, potentially cutting off their federal funding. The timing is no accident, being Trump signed the order on National Girls and Women's in Sports Day, ensuring that it would make maximum impact. Also standing behind him, Riley Gaines, the former Kentucky swimmer who's made a second career out of opposing transgender inclusion in women's sports. Now, just 3 days earlier, 3 of Leah Thomas's former teammates filed a lawsuit against the NCAA, Harvard, and Penn over Thomas's participation in women's swimming. Let's break down why this matters politically, shall we? Trump has been hammering the transgender athlete issue for years now. And that's because it's not just red meat rhetoric for his base. Polls suggest that a majority of Americans, including some independents and moderate Democrats, believe that there should be restrictions on trans participation in women's sports. AP Votecast found that over half voters think transgender rights have gone too far, and Trump clearly didn't miss that memo. His campaign leaned into the issue hard, using phrases like keeping men out of women's sports and ending transgender insanity. While critics argue the language is inflammatory and misleading, it clearly resonated with voters beyond just the hardcore conservatives. And now that he's back in office, he's wasting no time making it policy. You may be asking, can Trump actually do this? Well, here's where things get messy. Title IX prohibits sex-based discrimination in federally funded schools, but the interpretation of sex has been a battleground for years now. The Obama administration said Title IX protections include gender identity. The Trump administration reversed that. The Biden administration re-reversed it. And now Trump is swinging the pendulum back once more, defining sex strictly as what was assigned at birth. But does Trump really have the power to enforce this ban? Well, that's going to be up to the courts. Lawsuits are inevitable. Civil rights groups will argue that this order violates federal anti-discrimination laws and the Constitution itself. They're also likely to challenge whether Trump can pressure private organizations like the NCAA to change their policies. Speaking of, NCAA President Charlie Baker previously told lawmakers the organization would follow federal laws, but as of now hasn't responded to this latest development. The executive order is just the first shot in what's guaranteed to be a lengthy legal political fight. Some schools and states will challenge it immediately. Others will comply out of fear of losing federal funding. Meanwhile, transgender athletes and supporting groups will continue pushing back, while lawsuits are likely headed all the way to the Supreme Court. The only thing certain is that this move guarantees that transgender rights, and more broadly the culture war over gender, will be a defining issue in Trump's presidency. Whether you see this as protecting women's rights in sports or a blatant rollback of transgender rights, this fight is clearly just getting started.